Welcome back to the Witchy Web We Weave. I'm Alara.
I'm Alex.
And today we're going to be continuing our Tarot Tuesday series. We're going to be talking about the Chariot. We're going to do what we normally do. Insert the image here. We're going to look at some of the symbolism, pros, cons, good stuff, bad stuff. And then we're going to wrap it all up with some examples. Alright? So, when we're looking at the Chariot, I feel like the Chariot is a very iconic, it's a very iconic card within the tarot, I think, or at least I feel this way, because it's very striking. When you're first looking at the card, you see this person in this very elaborate chariot being drawn, traditionally in the Rider-Waite, by two sphinxes. So, normally, when you're looking at the traditional Rider-Waite chariot card, the two sphinxes, one is white and one is black. Sound familiar? Because it sounds very similar to the two columns, harkening back to the High Priestess, one black, one white. Was it Boaz and Jachin? So, but in this case, traditionally, I believe the sphinxes, the white one is supposed to indicate mercy, and the black one is supposed to indicate, like, implementing justice. Which I found to be very interesting. I normally wouldn't consider those two to be balancing aspects, but I feel like it helps kind of give some added layering and meaning to the Chariot. This is also a card where one of the figure itself is actually wearing a crown. Much like, I feel like a lot of the characters, the people in the Rider-Waite, have a lot of headdresses, crowns, and things like that. So, when we're looking at the driver of the chariot, their crown is, it's 3 8-pointed stars, and with crescent moons on the shoulders as well. So this is very much I feel like this is an idea of kind of harkening back to the greater universal aspects of it all, the divineness of it. Because when we're looking at the overall theme, keywords, things like that with the Chariot, things that come to mind are often the idea of power and cosmic force, or the idea of movements in life attributed to a force of will. It's almost like you're pushing yourself into the next phase of each of your, each of the phases of your life. So it almost kind of reminds me of that one rune that you talked about, that was the light. And I believe that's the one, where it's all about like your own personal drive to like keep going, to prevent yourself from stagnation.
Yeah, your path.
That's very much the spirit of the Chariot. So another symbolism that I noticed when I was first learning and looking at the card of the Chariot is the fact that the driver has a belt on them that is, when you actually look really closely at it, it's inscribed with the signs of the zodiac on it.
There's a lot of zodiac in terms.
There really is. But I also like the fact that the Chariot, I feel like by having the signs of the zodiac, and all of the stars, it's supposed to be reminiscent of like the turning of the year, the turning of time, the passage of time. It's all about time and movement and phases, and like getting yourself where you need to go and continuing that cycle. In some ways, I attribute the Chariot very closely to some of the energy of the Wheel of Fortune, because the Wheel of Fortune is also all about movement and the continuing of life and things like that. But I feel like the Chariot is more about the will to get things done and like the personal aspect of it all, whereas the Wheel of Fortune is the cosmic, like what is out of your hands. So the Chariot is like the movement of life and the continuing of things through your own power, and then the Wheel of Fortune is the obverse, but it's the things that are outside of your power. They're just things are going to happen because they happen, and like time will continue on without you, whether you are trying to work within it or not. So The Chariot is also one of the things that you will notice. The Chariot is one of those characters that also has a scepter, harkening back to some of the earlier discussions that we had with some of the other cards of the tarot, first starting with the Fool. So the Chariot is one of those characters that has a scepter, which is just a miniature version of a wand. And this is also another one of those characters that they're holding it very sturdily. They are not holding it daintily like the Fool. They are aware of their power. They know how to use it. They have it at their beck and call. But the scepter is also an indication of like royal authority, as well as the command of power that comes from the wand energy. And then I guess the last bit that I kind of want to just especially point out is that often with the Chariot there is a crest on the front of it, just between the two sphinxes, which is supposed to be a winged globe and is supposed to be a symbolization of self-awareness and aspiration, kind of tying back into some of those other things that I've already mentioned with this card about movement and force of will and the power and cosmic force of it all, and how things just, pushing yourself through the phases of life. So one of the other big things with the Chariot, before we get into the specific meanings, good and bad, some of the major things can also be, this card talks about and has a very big feeling of the lessons of like the journey of the soul. And is in some ways kind of the other side, or it's a different take on the energy of the stationary ruler, like the emperor. The emperor, he's a very stationary figure. He can't really move from his domain. He has to stay there and continue to upkeep his power, and he has to be there to make sure that things don't fall apart. The Chariot driver kind of has the power and the authority and it very much has some of the energy of the emperor, but is different in the means that it takes that energy and they move with it. They have to take it with them, because if they stop, they stagnate. So it's kind of a different, it's almost like a different version or a different facet of that similar energy. It's a different siphoning of it. But I think overall, the main meaning or the main theme of the Chariot is the idea of having the will to take control of your own life. So, something to keep in mind with the overall idea of this card. So let's kind of get more into the specifics. Let's talk about the good sides of drawing this card, or starting to try and interpret the goods of this card. Which can be the idea of success through hard work, or it can sometimes, in a lot of ways, the Chariot can be very closely associated with health when being pulled in readings. I've had quite a few times where the Chariot has been talking about someone's health, almost just as often as it's talking about someone either stagnating in life or moving through to a new phase of their life, which is maybe why I get the Chariot so much for you. But no, a lot of times when I do readings for Alex, whenever I do the Celtic Cross, normally, I'm going to say like 80 to 90% of the time, the Chariot comes up as either her significator, like her, representing her, or I get her as it's crossing her. So it's almost always in one of those two positions, which I find very interesting. And if it's not in one of those two positions, it's in one of the other cards in the spread. I almost always get the Chariot for her. Which is interesting because that's also, I want to say, like your birth card. Or it's supposed to be, the Chariot is represented by Cancer.
Oh.
So it is the card of Cancer, the zodiac sign. So going back to the positives, I got off on a little tangent. Going back to the positives, the Chariot can indicate self-discipline, or the need for clear thinking, positive movement, or the idea of needing self-control, or just simply that you're overcoming obstacles in your life. On the other side, when we're looking at the negatives of the Chariot, sometimes interpreting the negatives of the Chariot can indicate a misuse of energy within yourself or within your life, or simply stagnation, a lack of movement. I see that a lot with the reverse of the Chariot. It can also mean something a little bit more, rather than like a lack of movement, it can also indicate a loss of drive or a loss of, you know how when someone has that,
Like loss of passion?
yeah, but it's almost like someone not having the will to, like...
The will to live?
No. Well, it can. It can mean a loss of the will to live. That's a very severe interpretation of that card.
No, I was gonna say with that though, like, I didn't mean like, yeah, but I mean like sometimes
like
people...
severe apathy or depression?
Yeah.
Yes. It can
Which
indicate
is still
that.
just as serious, but...
Yes.
It's a different level of seriousness, I feel, than we're just gonna end it.
Yeah, it's a difference in intention. But yes, it the negative of this card can indicate apathy in life or a severe period of depression, stagnation.
Did you say one of these cards was like a midlife crisis? Is it this one?
There are a couple of different cards that can mean a midlife crisis, but yeah.
Because I thought, like,
Yeah.
because that fool's journey you did, I thought this was the card of...
It is. It's kind of where things fall apart. Which is a really good thing to know, is that sometimes a Chariot can indicate a midlife crisis or a major upset in a phase of life from which you're having trouble getting past or getting through, overcoming. Which is why it can also indicate an imbalance in your life. It can also indicate having little self-control, or having an overall fear of change. I see this a lot with having a fear to move on or a fear of change in general, which prevents you from doing significant things in your life. But like I was saying before, one of the major interpretations of the Chariot, funnily enough, is talking about specifically like your physical health. So the reverse or the negative downside to the Chariot can indicate that you're having some kind of physical health problems. Or even having some mental health issues too. In regards to specifically depression. When we're looking at examples, I have two different examples that I kind of really like for the idea of the Chariot. One of them, you all know that I'm a fan of Supernatural. One of them is Baby, which is the 67 Chevy Impala that Dean drives around.
The car.
The car itself. The car is I want to say, is a very good symbology within that show of movement and transition in their life, getting from place to place. Because not only is it getting them everywhere that they need to go, it is also acting as their home. It is the most stable thing that they have to a home until they discover the bunker and make that their home. But it's also the idea of, I like Baby as the idea of the Chariot because there are a lot of times within the show where the car is destroyed or damaged significantly to the point where it no longer works. And you see this happened a lot of times when Dean's character goes through a great stagnation or he comes into a very big trauma or crisis or issue that he's having to overcome. And his way of finding the will to keep moving is for him to rebuild the car, to repair the car. And it's almost like him working on the car is him repairing himself. And then once he has it in working order, he continues on his journey. And I find that that is a very good active representation of the concept of the Chariot. And then also another example, and the final example I'm going to give for the Chariot for me, is I wanted to give you an example or an option that is a person, that it kind of embodies some of the aspects of the Chariot, which is why for this I like the idea of the Disney princess Tiana from The Princess and the Frog, because she is one of those people that her entire life has been about hard work and perseverance and her strength of will. That everything that she has gained in her life has all been about her own personal strength and her will and drive to make things happen. She has physically pushed herself her entire life to follow her own road, her own path, and to make her dreams a reality. And I find that that is a very good embodiment of some of the spirit of the Chariot. Also because there is a point in her life where she has a major setback, where something happens to her that she didn't have planned. But she still finds that part within herself to keep going, to adjust, to adapt, and to continue applying that aspect of her character that makes her strong and continuing onward and persevering. So I wanted to give you kind of a literal, more symbolic application of the idea of the Chariot, and then I wanted to give you a more more human, more personified version of what the Chariot can be, because I feel like the Chariot is one of those where it can be the Chariot sometimes can appear in the idea of a person, but it can also come as a more broad or more generalized aspect of life. So I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of both. So I know this was another short one, but I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. And hopefully I'll see you next time for the next Tarot Tuesday, where we'll be covering strength.
Sorry, we got little floaties floating.
But I'll see you next time. Many blessings. Bye.